On November 10th, 2023, Jameka Williams was shot and killed outside her residence in Houston, Texas. She was 38 years old. According to police reports, the incident occurred in front of her children. The suspect fled the scene before law enforcement arrived. Jameka was pronounced dead at the scene. Williams was employed as a quality assurance manager at Cigna Healthcare and was a graduate of Texas Southern University. She had 4 children. Publicly available information confirms she had recently separated from a partner. There were no restraining orders or active police protections documented prior to her death. Witnesses stated that the suspect approached deliberately. There was no reported altercation prior to the shooting. The investigation focused on individuals previously involved with the victim. Early evidence suggested the act was targeted and not random. The incident led to a community response, including a fundraising campaign and increased public discussion on domestic violence and intervention failures. Law enforcement opened a homicide investigation. The suspect was later identified and taken into custody. Charges included first-degree murder and child endangerment.
3 young daughters and her killer still on the run. Fox 26's Abigail Dye went to the emotional balloon release tonight.
A mother killed in front of her 14, 12, and 7-year-old daughters.
They're traumatized because that's all that they're going to remember, the last look of her, like seeing her on the ground.
Pink balloons and broken hearts.
This case involves several investigative angles. The victim's background, possible warning signs prior to the incident, relationship history, legal system involvement, and immediate law enforcement response. The timeline of events leading up to the shooting is being used to assess whether the incident could have been prevented through earlier intervention or reporting. The purpose of this report is to examine the documented facts, establish the timeline, and review available records and law enforcement findings. The objective is to present a complete overview of the events leading to the death of Jameka Williams, the investigative process that followed, and the legal outcomes currently in progress. Stay with us as we unravel this shocking story and uncover the heartbreaking details of what led to this senseless loss. If you enjoy real crime stories that uncover the truth, don't forget to subscribe. Your support helps us share real cases, spread awareness, and give a voice to those who can't speak for themselves. Before we begin, let us know in the comments, where are you watching from? And what are your thoughts as the story unfolds? Welcome to True Crime Tales, where we reveal the crimes that shock communities and the secrets hidden behind closed doors. These are real people, real events, real consequences. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Now let's begin. Jameka Williams was a 38-year-old woman residing in Houston, Texas. She was employed as a quality assurance manager at Cigna Healthcare, a role she had held with distinction. Known for her attention to detail and work ethic, Jameka balanced her professional life with her responsibilities as a mother. She was a mother of 4 children, all of whom were deeply connected to her daily routines. Her family described her as protective, nurturing, and driven. Jameka was an alumna of Texas Southern University. Her academic background contributed to her rise in the healthcare sector. Outside of her job, she maintained a visible and positive presence on social media, frequently sharing motivational quotes, family-centered posts, and uplifting content. Friends describe her as someone who tried to see the best in life, even during difficult times. Within her community, she was a respected figure. Jameka was active in her local church and regularly attended school events and activities related to her children. She was considered a reliable figure in her support networks, someone who prioritized her family's well-being above all. Reports indicated she had recently separated from a long-term partner. Those close to her said the breakup had been difficult but necessary. Observers noted that although Jameka remained composed in public, subtle changes in her demeanor and routines suggested underlying tension in the final months of her life. In the months preceding her death, Jameka experienced a breakup with her long-term partner. Multiple sources close to the family suggested the relationship had become strained due to controlling behavior by the male partner. While no official police documentation was available in public records confirming physical abuse, several individuals stated that Jameka had previously expressed concerns about her safety and well-being. Friends reported she had started distancing herself from some social circles. According to multiple accounts, Jameka became more private and selective about who she communicated with and what she shared. She stopped attending certain gatherings and became more alert about her surroundings. Family members said that her tone shifted during conversations. She became more guarded, less open, and more focused on her children's routines. Although there was no restraining order filed, individuals close to the victim suggested that there had been repeated attempts by the former partner to contact her. These contacts were described as uninvited and consistent. One witness reported that Jameka confided she believed she was being watched, though no surveillance reports or official stalking complaints were found in public databases. Her behavior in the final days became increasingly cautious. She altered her routines and made fewer public appearances. Conversations with her children reportedly took on a more serious tone. There were signs she was preparing for something or trying to prevent something, but those signs would ultimately be too subtle, too late. The events unfolded during the evening hours of Friday, November 10th, 2023. Jameka had returned to her residence in Houston, Texas, where she lived with her children. According to reports, it was a typical day in terms of schedule. She had worked, returned home, and began her evening routine with the children. At some point that evening, an individual, later confirmed to be known to Jameka, approached her outside of her home. Several of her children were reportedly present at the time. There was no verbal altercation noted by neighbors or witnesses. The shooter approached Jameka directly with intent. Multiple shots were fired. The exact number has not been disclosed by law enforcement or family representatives. Witnesses said the shooting happened quickly, leaving no time for intervention or escape. Jameka collapsed at the scene. The suspect immediately fled, leaving behind stunned and traumatized children. A neighbor dialed emergency services, who arrived minutes later. Despite efforts to stabilize her, Jameka Williams was pronounced dead at the scene. The scene was secured. Police began immediate canvassing for security footage from nearby homes and traffic cameras. Interviews with witnesses, including children and neighbors, were conducted that same night. Initial reports confirmed this was not a random attack. Law enforcement confirmed early on that the victim and the shooter had a prior connection, believed to be a domestic relationship. The attack was classified as a homicide with potential premeditation. Investigators pursued the suspect, though his name was not publicly released within the first 48 hours. The case was assigned to homicide detectives familiar with domestic violence-related crimes. Do you think unfiled concerns and verbal threats should be treated with the same weight as physical violence in domestic disputes? Why do many victims hesitate to file restraining orders, even when they feel unsafe? How can communities improve early intervention when someone feels they're being watched or threatened? What signs should friends and families never ignore in someone's changing behavior? Can technology and surveillance play a stronger role in preventing crimes like this before they happen? In the days following the fatal shooting of 38-year-old Jameka Williams in Houston, Texas, the impact rippled far beyond the crime scene. Williams, a devoted mother of 4, was killed in front of her children. An event that left lasting emotional damage not only on her family, but on the surrounding community. Her children, present during the attack, were immediately removed from the scene and placed under the temporary care of relatives. Reports confirmed that child protection services were brought in to ensure safety and psychological intervention. Early assessments indicated emotional trauma among the minors, prompting urgent arrangements for grief counseling and long-term mental health support. The oldest child, reported to be in their early teens, provided limited details to law enforcement under the supervision of social workers. The family of Jameka Williams released a short public statement in the immediate aftermath of her death. The message was direct. They demanded justice and requested privacy as they processed a sudden loss. The statement made no reference to a known suspect, but emphasized that Jameka had lived for her children and did not deserve to be taken so violently. Social media platforms were quickly filled with posts paying tribute to Jameka. Women across Houston and beyond posted messages expressing both grief and solidarity, often connecting her case to the broader issue of domestic violence. Posts under hashtags such as hashtag Justice for Jameka and hashtag Say Her Name included personal anecdotes from women who had endured similar situations, many of which involved separation from abusive partners. Within 48 hours of her death, a GoFundMe campaign was launched by a verified family member. The stated goal was to cover funeral costs and establish a fund for the continued care of her 4 children. As the campaign gained traction, it was shared widely on local Facebook pages, true crime groups, and among Houston area church networks. The fundraising page included pictures of Jameka with her children and brief commentary describing her as a protector and provider. Local news outlets picked up the story early, but the initial coverage was minimal. Reports confirmed the shooting, acknowledged the presence of children at the scene, and stated that the investigation was ongoing. Notably, no official suspect name was released during the early coverage. Multiple outlets referenced domestic violence as a possible factor, but offered little in terms of specifics. This lack of immediate detail, combined with no swift arrest, raised concern among members of the public. Community advocates questioned whether Jameka had previously reached out to law enforcement, and if any red flags had gone unaddressed. Women's advocacy organizations issued statements urging police to take quick action and disclose more information. Petitions began circulating, demanding transparency in the investigation and calling for stronger protections for domestic violence victims. As public pressure mounted, the Houston Police Department moved into the next phase of its response. Law enforcement classified the case as a homicide within hours of the shooting. The working theory, according to internal sources not named publicly, was that this was a targeted act, possibly domestic in nature. Initial statements from police confirmed that the suspect appeared to have known the victim and that the shooting was not random. Investigators began canvassing the area for surveillance footage from nearby homes, apartment complexes, and businesses. Multiple homes were equipped with Ring doorbell systems and other video monitoring tools. Law enforcement reviewed any footage from the hours surrounding the crime, especially material that could place the suspect near the victim's home prior to the shooting. Detectives conducted interviews with neighbors and family friends. Several neighbors reported seeing a vehicle circling the area days before the murder, and one resident claimed to have seen an unfamiliar man sitting in a parked car for extended periods on multiple evenings. These leads were noted and cross-referenced with Jameka's known associates. The suspect was reportedly identified early in the investigation, but not named publicly at first. Law enforcement sources cited the need to gather additional evidence before issuing a warrant or releasing details to the press. This delay led to increased criticism from advocacy groups and local citizens, who fear that a known and possibly dangerous individual was still at large. Family cooperation was confirmed. Investigators worked closely with relatives to obtain more information about Jameka's past relationships, potential threats, and recent concerns she may have voiced. The children, having witnessed the shooting, were considered key witnesses. Their statements were taken under close supervision, with trauma-informed interview techniques used to minimize further harm. Detectives also reviewed Jameka's phone records, social media activity, and text messages. According to sources familiar with the case, there were signs of repeated, unwanted communication from a former partner leading up to the incident. These communications reportedly included threats and demands for reconciliation. Screenshots and call logs were preserved as potential evidence. The name of the suspect was not disclosed in the immediate aftermath of the murder. However, it was widely speculated, and later supported by internal sources, that the individual was a former romantic partner of Jameka's. The motive under consideration was jealousy, possessiveness, and refusal to accept the end of their relationship. Friends of the victim provided informal statements to media and law enforcement indicating that the suspect had a history of controlling behavior. Descriptions included terms like obsessive, manipulative, and quick-tempered. Although not all friends were aware of physical violence, several indicated that Jameka had expressed concern about being followed and had once mentioned her intention to change a routine out of fear. Law enforcement reviewed the suspect's prior criminal record. Public records showed at least one previous charge for harassment, though it had not resulted in jail time. There were no known restraining orders filed by Jameka, but investigators found online posts that hinted at emotional and psychological abuse. Further, Interviews with co-workers at Cigna Healthcare suggested that Jameka had recently begun changing her commute pattern and working remotely more often. She reportedly told one colleague she was trying to avoid a problem, but did not elaborate. The suspect's status, whether arrested or at large, was not disclosed publicly at the time of early reporting. Unconfirmed sources later stated that a warrant had been issued and law enforcement was actively pursuing leads on the suspect's whereabouts. Surveillance footage reportedly tied the suspect's vehicle to the scene on the evening of the murder. Community advocates and media outlets continue to demand updates. Meanwhile, pressure built around the investigation's pace, with public sentiment growing increasingly frustrated at what appeared to be a slow pursuit of justice. Shortly after the fatal shooting of 38-year-old Jameka Williams outside her Houston home on November 10, 2023, law enforcement officials launched a full-scale investigation to identify and apprehend the suspect. Within 72 hours, Houston Police Department issued a statement confirming the arrest of a man believed to be Jameka's former partner. His name was withheld initially, pending formal charges. Investigators pieced together eyewitness testimonies, including statements from Jameka's children and neighbors. Surveillance footage from nearby residences reportedly captured a vehicle matching the suspect's car, leaving the scene shortly after shots were fired. Police used cell phone tower data and vehicle registration information to track the suspect's movements before and after the incident. He was taken into custody on November 13, 2023, without incident during a traffic stop on the outskirts of Harris County. Following the arrest, the district attorney's office filed multiple felony charges: first-degree murder for premeditated killing of Jameka Williams and endangering a child due to the fact that at least one of her children witnessed a shooting from a close distance. The suspect was booked at the Harris County Jail, where he awaited his initial court appearance. During the bond hearing, the prosecution emphasized the severity of the crime, the trauma inflicted on the children, and the risk of flight. They requested no bond. The defense argued for a reduced bond amount, citing the suspect's lack of prior violent felony convictions and his community ties. However, the judge denied bond based on the probable cause affidavit and the risk posed to surviving witnesses and family members. Over the following weeks, pretrial motions revealed both sides' legal strategies. The defense filed a motion to suppress the children's testimonies, citing trauma and lack of reliability under emotional stress. Another motion requested a psychological evaluation of the defendant. A public defender representing the accused initially hinted at a crime of passion defense, claiming the murder was not premeditated but rather an impulsive act during a heated argument. However, this theory lacked substantiating evidence and did not align with what investigators had documented. The prosecution focused on premeditation and calculated intent. They presented digital evidence, including threatening text messages sent by the suspect weeks before the incident. Search history from the suspect's phone revealed prior queries about restraining orders and untraceable firearms. Furthermore, the timeline of events, particularly the suspect's deliberate drive to Jameka's home after weeks of separation, was used to support the theory that the act was planned. As the legal battle gained momentum, community activists and victim advocacy groups pushed for a maximum sentence, including life without parole. Public demonstrations and press conferences were organized outside the courthouse in the weeks leading up to the trial. The trial was scheduled for March 2024. Media coverage intensified as more details emerged through court filings and witness interviews. Courtroom sketches and updates appeared daily on local news outlets and social media channels. Throughout the proceedings, the defendant remained mostly silent, often avoiding eye contact with Jameka's family members present in court. His demeanor was described by court reporters as stoic and unengaged. Key testimony came from forensic experts, digital analysts, and Jameka's oldest child, who, despite undergoing trauma counseling, gave a recorded statement about the moments leading up to the shooting. The jury deliberated for 2 days before reaching a unanimous verdict: guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced the defendant to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Public reaction to the case began as soon as news of Jameka Williams' death spread online. Within hours of her identity being released, friends, family, and community members created tributes and memory posts. A candlelight vigil was organized in her honor, just days after the shooting, drawing hundreds of attendees. Another was held on the day of her funeral. Two major hashtags quickly trended on social media platforms. Hashtag Justice for Jameka and hashtag Say Her Name, both aimed at drawing attention to domestic violence and femicide in the Houston area. Activists used Jameka's story to highlight the systemic failure to protect women who leave controlling or abusive partners. National domestic violence advocacy organizations issued statements referencing the case, urging lawmakers to strengthen protection policies for women at risk. Public discourse surrounding stalking behavior, coercive control, and red flag laws intensified. Online forums and media outlets covered the broader implications of the case, especially the documented pattern of ignored warning signs that often lead to homicide. Several local women's shelters reported a noticeable spike in calls and consultations from survivors, citing concerns similar to those described in Jameka's case. Churches and schools across Houston mobilized to support her children. Fundraisers were held to help with funeral costs, legal support, and therapy for the minors. As trial updates were posted online, the public engaged in debates about sentencing, accountability, and early intervention. The story gained national media attention when major outlets picked up the trial verdict in March 2024, sparking renewed conversations around domestic violence legislation. Jameka Williams left behind 4 children, ranging in age from toddler to early teens. 2 of them reportedly witnessed her shooting. The long-term psychological trauma of this event remains a critical concern for both family members and child welfare advocates. In the immediate aftermath of the murder, the children were placed in temporary custody with close relatives. Eventually, guardianship was awarded to their maternal grandparents, who also coordinated with licensed trauma counselors to begin therapeutic support. The youngest child, unable to comprehend the full scale of the tragedy, reportedly began to exhibit regressive behavior, while the older children displayed signs of post-traumatic stress. Local schools activated their crisis response units, offering emotional support sessions, adjusted workloads, and personalized education plans for the children affected. Social services remained involved, conducting welfare checks and connecting the family with long-term trauma support programs. One of the most impactful moments during sentencing came when a recorded statement from Jameka's oldest child was played in court. The statement, submitted to the family's attorney, recounted the emotional and physical effects of watching their mother die and described her as a shield who no longer stood between them and the world. Following the trial, friends and family of Jameka launched a community initiative named the Jameka Foundation, dedicated to supporting victims of domestic violence, particularly those with children. The foundation partnered with advocacy groups to provide emergency relocation grants, mental health services, and educational resources for survivors and their families. The story of Jameka Williams continues to serve as a sobering example of the deadly consequences of untreated domestic conflict and the societal need for early intervention. Through public advocacy, legal action, and a sustained commitment from her loved ones, her name remains part of a growing call to action. The courtroom was filled with silence as the final verdict was read. After months of hearings, witness testimonies, evidence presentations, and deliberation, the jury found the defendant, Jameka Williams' former partner, guilty of first-degree murder. The prosecution had presented a case built on premeditation, motive, and psychological control, arguing that this was not a spontaneous act of violence, but rather the final step in a long pattern of manipulation and obsession. The sentencing phase followed swiftly. The judge handed down life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, citing the presence of children during the crime, the calculated nature of the killing, and the emotional devastation inflicted on the surviving family members. The courtroom heard multiple victim impact statements, a sobering reminder of the irreversible void left by Jameka's death. Her eldest daughter, speaking with composure beyond her years, recalled witnessing her mother's final moments and described the psychological trauma that still wakes her up at night. A cousin spoke on behalf of the family, describing Jameka not just as a mother, but as the only anchor keeping the family together. Though the sentencing provided a form of legal closure, many in the family and community acknowledged that emotional closure remained distant. The children, now living with relatives, faced years of counseling and adjustment. The family was left with lingering questions. Could this have been stopped? Did the system fail Jameka? The investigation and trial uncovered several systemic gaps that continue to concern advocates and legal experts. One key question remains: could this murder have been prevented? According to those close to Jameka, the warning signs were there. Friends reported she had expressed fear in the weeks leading up to the shooting. She mentioned being followed, receiving repeated unwanted calls, and noticing her ex-partner parked near her workplace and home. However, no restraining order was ever filed. This raises concerns about how stalking and emotional abuse are addressed legally, particularly in the absence of physical violence. In many jurisdictions, including Texas, stalking laws require pattern behavior and credible threats to trigger legal action. For women like Jameka, who may be hesitant to escalate out of fear of retaliation, the threshold for protection may simply be too high. Another major concern is whether law enforcement missed red flags. Were there previous domestic disturbance calls? Did officers respond appropriately? Were early intervention resources made available to Jameka? These are questions that remain unanswered, as official reports were limited in detail. What is clear is that a coordinated domestic violence response system was either unavailable or not accessed in this case. Advocates also question whether Texas stalking and domestic violence laws are adequate. Some believe the legal system still prioritizes physical evidence over behavioral red flags, leaving many women without protection until violence escalates. This case also highlights the need for public education on warning signs of obsession and control. Jameka's story is a reminder that domestic abuse doesn't always begin with bruises. It begins with isolation, monitoring, intimidation, emotional threats, and refusal to accept boundaries. Understanding and responding to these early indicators is crucial to prevention. Beyond individual behavior, larger systems failed Jameka Williams. These include legal systems that didn't act fast enough, social systems that normalize emotional abuse, and community responses that may have treated warning signs as private relationship issues instead of public safety concerns. As we examine the final verdict in the murder of Jameka Williams, we're left with powerful questions that extend far beyond this one tragedy. Do you believe the justice system is doing enough to protect women from domestic threats before it escalates to murder? What early signs of obsession or control have you personally witnessed, either in yourself, a friend, or a loved one? Did you act on them? Should every woman experiencing emotional abuse seek legal protection, even if there's been no physical harm? Or are current legal protections too weak to help in time? How can we prevent stories like Jameka's from repeating in our communities? What laws, outreach, or education do you believe are missing right now? If a friend confided in you that they felt watched or followed, but had no proof, what would you do? Would you encourage legal action or dismiss it as paranoia? The story of Jameka Williams is a chilling reminder that many domestic murders don't begin with violence. They begin with silence. Patterns of control, manipulation, and fear often go unnoticed, unreported, or dismissed. In this case, the legal system ultimately delivered conviction, but it failed to protect Jameka when she was alive. Her death now serves as a public call to re-examine how we respond to emotional abuse, stalking, and domestic threats before they turn fatal. Let us know in the comments. Do you think this case was preventable? What should have been done differently? Your voice may help prevent another tragedy. If you found this story as gripping and heartbreaking as we did, don't forget to like this video and share it with others. And if you want to hear more true crime stories that uncover the mysteries behind these tragic events, make sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell. You won't want to miss our latest stories, updates, and discussions. Thank you for joining us on this journey to seek justice and explore the truth. Together, we can make a difference. Until next time, stay safe and stay aware. On the morning of February 3rd, 2020, at Texas A&M University, commerce student contacted the university's maintenance department to report a strange hole in her dorm wall. What began as a standard facilities issue turned into the exposure of a double homicide inside a supposedly secure college residence hall. When university staff responded to call, they entered the neighboring dorm room and discovered a grim scene. Two young women, sisters Deja Matts, 19, and Abbaney Matts, 20, were found dead from gunshot wounds. Lying nearby was a 2-year-old child, alive but suffering from a gunshot injury. The suspect, Jock Smith, had a violent history and was the ex-boyfriend of one of the victims. Just days before the murders, a protective order had been filed against him. But despite that legal barrier, he managed to enter a locked university dormitory, bypassing multiple layers of security without any signs of forced entry. Authorities quickly launched an investigation, uncovering surveillance footage, forensic evidence, and disturbing flaws in the campus's access control systems. Smith was arrested within 24 hours, but major questions remain. How did he get in? Why weren't access credentials immediately revoked after protective order? And how did a known repeat offender reach his victims without raising alarms?
Police spent hours searching the Rowlett home where 21-year-old Jacques Smith was arrested, a day after police say he gunned down 20-year-old Abbaney Matts and her sister, 19-year-old Deja Matts, inside Deja's dorm room at Texas A&M Commerce. She was studying public health.
University Police Department is again.
Today, police released a 911 call from a student who found a bullet hole in her dorm room wall.
It looks like it came with the ceiling. Parts of the ceiling had fallen.
Family members say Abbaney took her 2-year-old son with her when she drove her sister back to school Sunday. It was late, so she stayed the night. How Smith gained entry to the dorm room Monday morning is a question the Matts family wants answered.
This case doesn't just expose a failure in personal protection. It reveals deeper vulnerabilities in how college campuses handle threats, enforce legal orders, and manage security systems. When safety protocols break down from the inside, even locked doors aren't enough. What really happened inside that dorm room? And how many other campuses are quietly at risk? This story uncovers every overlooked detail. Stay with us as we unravel this shocking story and uncover the heartbreaking details of what led to this senseless loss. If you enjoy real crime stories that uncover the truth, don't forget to subscribe. Your support helps us share real cases, spread awareness, and give a voice to those who can't speak for themselves. Before we begin, let us know in the comments, where are you watching from, and what are your thoughts as the story unfolds? Welcome to True Crime Tales, where we reveal the crimes that shock communities and the secrets hidden behind closed doors. These are real people, real events, real consequences. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Now, let's begin. At Texas A&M University, Commerce, 19-year-old Deja Matts had just begun her journey into adulthood. A freshman student with academic aspirations, she was described by classmates as quiet, dedicated, and focused on her studies. Deja had no known conflicts, no threats against her, and no involvement in criminal activity. She kept a low profile and maintained good standing with the university. According to university records and peer testimony, Deja was not the intended target in a violent act that would soon claim her life. Her only connection to the perpetrator was her relationship to her older sister, Abbaney. Abbaney Matts, 20, was not enrolled at the university. She was temporarily staying in Deja's dorm room, an arrangement not uncommon among family members during difficult personal times. She had recently left an abusive relationship with 21-year-old Jacques Smith. That relationship had produced a child, a 2-year-old boy, who was also present at the crime scene. Abbaney was known to law enforcement through a series of domestic violence reports involving Smith. Though she had made efforts to leave the relationship, the risk remained. She was actively trying to rebuild her life while seeking safety with her sister. The youngest person involved in the tragedy was a 2-year-old son of Abbaney Matts and Jacques Smith. He was inside the Pride Rock Residence Hall dorm room at the time of the murders. According to police reports, the child was shot and critically injured during the attack, but survived. Responders found him alive, suffering from gunshot wounds, and rushed him to the nearest medical facility for emergency care. He was stabilized and later placed into protective custody. His survival added urgency to the case and raised new concerns about the escalating danger of domestic violence involving children. The fact that the child was present during the incident provided key investigative value. Not only did it confirm the proximity of Smith to his former partner, it also underscored a violation of a protective order that had explicitly barred him from coming near either Abbaney or the child. The survivor's presence also added weight to the legal charges later brought against Smith, including multiple counts of aggravated assault. Jacques Smith and Abbaney Matts shared a volatile history. The The couple had been in an on-and-off relationship that included multiple incidents of domestic violence. Police records show that Smith had previously been arrested for assaulting Abbaney, with at least one reported case resulting in criminal charges. Despite her efforts to separate from him, Smith continued to pursue contact with her. This pattern escalated in the months leading up to the murders. According to court records, a protective order was issued against Jacques Smith in late January 2020, just days before the fatal shooting. The order was filed following a violent incident and included specific language preventing Smith from making contact with Abbaney or their child. It also barred him from entering her residence or coming within a certain distance. The order was active and legally enforceable at the time of the attack. Law enforcement confirmed that Smith had violated the terms of this protective order by entering the dormitory and confronting Abbaney and Deja Matts. His actions indicated a clear disregard for the legal restrictions placed upon him and raised questions about the effectiveness of protective measures in cases involving known repeat offenders. The case of Jacques Smith followed a known trajectory common in fatal domestic violence cases. Repeated abuse, ignored warnings, legal protections without enforcement, and eventual fatal escalation. Despite prior arrests, Smith had not served significant jail time for previous assaults. Police had responded to multiple calls involving him, yet these encounters failed to stop his behavior. Reports from Abbaney's family suggest she had made repeated efforts to alert authorities about the threat he posed. This sequence of events placed all individuals in the dormitory at risk. The fact that Smith was able to enter a supposedly secure campus facility, despite an active protective order and no student credentials, revealed serious flaws in enforcement and security protocols. The protective order issued to Abbaney Matts was intended to act as a barrier between her and Jacques Smith. However, the legal mechanism alone lacked physical enforcement. There was no system in place at Texas A&M Commerce to automatically alert campus security or restrict access to individuals subject to such orders. Smith reportedly used a mailbox key or other previously issued access method to enter the residence hall. There were no signs of forced entry. No alerts were triggered. No staff intercepted him. This gap in security allowed a known violent individual to move freely into a building filled with students. It demonstrated how, in practical terms, a piece of paper labeled protective order was not enough to stop a determined aggressor. It also reflected the need for integrated systems between law enforcement, judicial institutions, and private or public property management, especially in high-risk cases. Should college campuses be required to integrate protective order databases into their access control systems? Are protective orders effective if not tied to real-time location and access restrictions? Should individuals with documented histories of domestic violence have automatic restrictions from visiting campus facilities? What additional security measures should be enforced in student housing to prevent similar cases? In the final days of January 2020, Jacques Smith was arrested for domestic assault after a violent altercation with his former partner, Abbaney Matts. Despite his history of aggression and prior arrests, Smith was released soon after his arrest. The incident marked yet another escalation in a documented pattern of abuse. In response, Abbaney filed for a protective order, which was granted in the days immediately following Smith's release. The order legally barred him from making contact with her or coming near her residence. Abbaney, 20, was not a student at Texas A&M Commerce, but she had been staying with her younger sister, Deja Matts, 19, who lived in Pride Rock Residence Hall, a dormitory on the university campus. Concerned for her safety and that of her 2-year-old child, Abbaney chose to stay with Deja temporarily, while the legal system processed protective order. However, one critical vulnerability went unaddressed. Jacques Smith still had possession of a physical mailbox key that belonged to Abbaney. Whether issued to her during a prior visit or not returned after a prior stay, the key remained active and unmonitored. That key, seemingly insignificant, was Smith's covert way into a secure building. The university's access control systems did not flag or restrict his entry because it was not a broken door or forced entry. It was a quiet exploitation of a working key. There were no alerts triggered when Smith entered the dormitory. There were no access logs alerting campus security. The doors opened without resistance. The cameras recorded him, but no one was watching live. Deja and Abbaney were inside the dorm room, unaware that Smith was in the building. They had no warning and no chance to prepare. On February 3rd, 2020, Smith made his way to Pride Rock Residence Hall. There was no broken window, no crowbar, no force. Using the mailbox key, he gained access to the dormitory without triggering any security protocols. Once inside, he moved directly to the room where Deja and Abbaney were staying with Abbaney's 2-year-old child. Inside the dorm room, Smith opened fire. The details gathered from ballistic reports and forensic analysis later confirmed the violent efficiency of his actions. Deja Matts was shot. Abbaney Matts was shot. The child was shot, but managed to survive the attack. There was no noise heard from outside the room that would indicate a struggle or a call for help. Students in nearby rooms went about their day unaware that a double homicide had just taken place a few feet away. Smith fled the scene without detection. He exited the building the same way he entered, quietly, with no resistance. The only clue that something had gone wrong came from a student living in the adjacent room. The student reported a mysterious hole in the wall, which prompted a routine maintenance response. When maintenance staff arrived to inspect the complaint, they entered the neighboring dorm room. What they discovered turned a maintenance call into a murder investigation. Inside the dorm room, they found the lifeless bodies of Deja and Abbaney Matts. The child, though wounded, was still alive. Emergency services were contacted immediately. The toddler was transported to a local hospital in critical condition. In response to the double homicide, the university initiated a campus-wide lockdown. Students were ordered to shelter in place as law enforcement secured the area. Texas A&M Commerce Police Department took the lead in the initial investigation, with assistance from local and regional law enforcement agencies. The crime scene was secured. Investigators began processing the area, mapping bullet trajectories, identifying entry and exit points, and searching for any physical evidence that could indicate how the suspect gained access. One detail became immediately clear. There was no forced entry. Doors were intact. Locks were functional. Nothing had been broken. This detail shifted the investigation's focus toward access permissions and keys. Police and campus security began reviewing internal security footage, key issuance records, and access logs. As they gathered information, they developed a working theory that the attacker had exploited some form of access that bypassed the main entry protocol. At the same time, the victims were identified and next of kin were notified. As law enforcement worked behind the scenes, the university community began to react to reality that 2 women had been murdered in what was believed to be a secure residence hall. Surveillance cameras installed in the Pride Rock Residence Hall recorded Jock Smith's movements on February 3rd. The footage showed him entering the building without any signs of a struggle or manipulation of the doors. His behavior did not raise any immediate red flags to staff, likely because there was no forced entry or aggressive movement. He walked in like someone who belonged there. Further investigation of access methods revealed that the mailbox key he used was not deactivated. This allowed him to enter parts of the building that should have been off-limits. The system in place at the university at the time did not link key activity to protective orders or campus safety alerts. Therefore, no digital alert or notification was generated when Smith entered the premises. Crime scene investigators found multiple shell casings inside the dorm room. Ballistic analysis confirmed the weapon used and tied it to the suspect. Bullet paths helped investigators understand the positions of the victims at the time of the shooting. Blood patterns and spatter evidence further confirmed that the victims had little or no time to react. The child's injuries were consistent with a close-range gunshot wound. Despite the severity, the child survived, an outcome that added urgency to the investigation and later became a key component in the charges filed against Smith.
Police spent hours searching the Rowlett home where 21-year-old Jasity Smith was arrested, a day after police say he gunned down 20-year-old Abbaney Matts and her sister, 19-year-old Deja Matts, inside Deja's dorm room at Texas A&M Commerce. She was studying public health.
University Police Department of Virginia.
Today, police released a 911 call from a student who found a bullet hole in her dorm room wall.
It looks like the ceiling, parts of the ceiling has fallen.
Family members say Abbaney took her 2-year-old son with her when she drove her sister back to school Sunday. It was late, so she stayed the night. How Smith gained entry to the dorm room Monday morning is a question the Matts family wants answered. Last week, courts ordered Smith to stay away from Abbaney. A restraining order was issued after Smith was arrested in Garland, accused of assaulting her with a frying pan and a lamp. And police say he pulled a knife. He was arrested, but records show he bonded out 2 days later. University police say surveillance video and witness tips led to Smith's arrest. Hours before, he wrote to Abbaney directly in a Facebook post saying, quote, "We were supposed to grow old together, and I can't even look at our pictures without crying."
Should campus access systems immediately revoke entry for anyone listed in a protective order? Should physical keys be replaced with revocable electronic access systems in college dorms? How can universities better monitor known threats who are not students but have connections to student residents? Was this tragedy preventable? And if so, where did the system fail the most? Within hours of discovering the bodies of 19-year-old Deja Matts and 20-year-old Abbaney Matts inside the Pride Rock Residence Hall, investigators named Jock Smith as the primary suspect. Smith was the ex-boyfriend of Abbaney and the father of the 2-year-old child who survived the shooting with injuries. Initial witness statements, security camera footage, and forensic evidence all pointed directly to Smith. Detectives worked with both the Texas A&M Commerce Police Department and the Hunt County Sheriff's Office to issue a regional BOLO, be on the lookout alert. His known address, phone records, and previous vehicle information were used to triangulate his last known location. By that same night, a multi-agency search effort, including local law enforcement and federal support, had located Smith in Rowlett, Texas, approximately 50 miles from the campus. He was arrested without incident. At the time of his arrest, Smith was unarmed but reportedly cooperative. He was formally charged with capital murder, which in Texas could result in life without parole or the death penalty, and aggravated assault with a deadly weapon for the shooting of the toddler. Smith was booked into the Hunt County Jail and held without bond pending court appearances. Jock Smith had a long-standing history with law enforcement. Public records confirm multiple prior arrests, most involving violent behavior. His rap sheet included family violence charges, including a documented physical altercation with Abbaney Matts prior to her death, previous assault arrests, including one incident involving bodily injury to a past partner, weapons possession violations, despite restrictions due to his criminal background, at least one protective order violation before the fatal incident. Smith had been arrested just 10 days earlier for allegedly assaulting Abbaney, which led to the protective order issued against him. Despite this, he was released back into the community with no tracking, restrictions, or monitoring beyond the court-issued document. Multiple police departments had prior knowledge of Smith and categorized him as a high-risk offender. However, none of these alerts were shared directly with Texas A&M Commerce or the university's housing administrators. As a result, campus authorities had no warning about Smith's potential threat level. Abbaney Matts had obtained a protective order against Smith just days before the murders. The order included specific language barring him from contacting or being within a certain distance of her. However, the order's effectiveness stopped at enforcement. The document did not include any technological or institutional enforcement mechanisms. It was not linked to the university security system, housing database, or key access registry. This meant that, despite a legal barrier, Smith still had unrestricted physical access to Abbaney's location, especially since he possessed a mailbox key from his previous visits. No law required Smith's access credentials to be revoked upon issuance of the order. There was also no coordination between the family court that issued the order and the university's housing department. Because of this disconnect, dorm authorities were unaware that a violent offender with legal restrictions was able to move freely within a building full of students. The protective order existed on paper, but it failed to provide any real barrier. Law enforcement could only act after the order was violated, and in this case, it was already too late. The murders occurred inside Pride Rock Residence Hall, a dormitory marketed as a secure and controlled access housing facility. However, several lapses allowed Jock Smith to enter undetected and unchallenged. Mailbox key as access tool. Smith likely used a mailbox key assigned to Abbaney Matts to bypass the main entrance. While mailboxes were located inside the dorm, these keys inadvertently allowed broader access to common areas due to outdated hardware design. There was no digital verification, no access log tied to the key, and no alert raised during entry. Access control system not properly updated. When Abbaney ended her relationship with Smith, there was no mechanism in place to remove his access to the dorm. Her request for a protective order was not linked to an automatic review of housing security or guest access. This gap allowed Smith to continue using outdated credentials with no digital fingerprint or oversight. No manual check-ins or swipe logs required. The residence hall did not require students or guests to swipe IDs upon entry. Unlike hotels or high-security campuses, there was no front desk security, lobby check-in, or guest approval process. This allowed Smith to walk in without leaving a trace. Room entry without forced entry. Investigators determined that the dorm room door could be opened from the inside if previously unlocked or improperly latched. Whether Smith was let in voluntarily, had access to a spare key, or waited until the door was ajar remains unclear. However, the key fact is that no force was required to enter, meaning no alarms were triggered and no damage was reported. These weaknesses enabled Smith to carry out the attack without alerting security personnel or campus police. The university's reliance on passive, outdated systems left the dorm vulnerable to anyone with insider knowledge. This case forces critical questions. Should protective orders automatically trigger revocation of campus access privileges? Should campus mail keys be redesigned to restrict broader access? Are current security systems reactive rather than preventive? Until institutions close these loopholes, similar tragedies remain possible, even in places advertised as safe. The double murder of sisters Deja and Abbaney Matts inside Pride Rock Residence Hall at Texas A&M University, Commerce on February 3, 2020, shocked the campus and quickly spread across national headlines. 2 young women were found shot to death inside what was supposed to be a secure dormitory. A 2-year-old child, Abbaney's son, was wounded but survived. In response, Texas A&M Commerce released a public statement acknowledging the tragedy. The university confirmed that 2 women were deceased and that law enforcement was actively investigating. They emphasized their cooperation with authorities and expressed their intent to support impacted students and staff. The university also announced a temporary campus-wide lockdown immediately after the incident, which was lifted later that day. Classes were suspended for multiple days as the investigation unfolded. Mental health counselors were made available, and campus police increased visibility around dormitories. The campus community organized a vigil to remember Deja and Abbaney Matts. Students, faculty, and community members gathered outside the dormitory to hold a candlelight ceremony. The vigil was peaceful, with speakers calling for safety reforms and greater accountability. Outside the university, public attention quickly shifted to the issue of dorm security. Social media erupted with questions about how the killer, Jameka Smith, gained entry without forced entry, despite being under protective order. Parents of other students began demanding answers from the administration. Local and national news outlets questioned the reliability of access control systems in college residence halls, especially those that house young women and children. Concerns over how the university handled building access, visitor monitoring, and security alerts were now at the forefront of discussion. For many, the tragedy raised alarm about whether college campuses were truly prepared for domestic violence threats coming from outside the student population. Jameka Smith was arrested in Rowlett, Texas, hours after the murders. Law enforcement had identified him as a prime suspect almost immediately due to his relationship with Abbaney Matts, his recent arrest for domestic violence, and a protective order filed against him just days prior to the murders. Smith was charged with capital murder, a charge that carries a possibility of life without parole in the state of Texas. He was also charged with aggravated assault due to the injuries sustained by the 2-year-old child. According to legal filings, prosecutors intended to pursue the case as a double homicide with additional child endangerment elements. Smith pleaded not guilty. During initial hearings, the court reviewed evidence collected from the crime scene and digital surveillance. Court documents revealed that surveillance footage showed Smith entering the dormitory without force. No doors or locks were damaged. Instead, investigators discovered that he likely used a mailbox key that still provided access to the building. Further evidence presented included forensic findings, shell casings, bullet trajectories, and blood spatter confirmed close-range gunfire. Digital footprint, text messages and call logs showed Smith had made repeated contact attempts despite the protective order. Witness statements. Other dorm residents reported hearing noises and a child crying, but did not initially recognize it as gunfire. Smith's criminal history became central to public debate. He had been arrested previously for family violence and weapon possession, and was considered a repeat offender. This led to broader concerns about how protective orders are enforced and whether they are effective at preventing escalation in domestic violence cases. As of the first several months after his arrest, no official trial date had been set. Pre-trial motions focused on the admissibility of surveillance footage and previous arrest records. The murders exposed critical systemic vulnerabilities that extended beyond one campus. The case demonstrated how college campuses may lack real-time protective infrastructure for students facing intimate partner violence. Failure to enforce protective orders on campus. Despite a protective order issued just days earlier, Smith was able to enter the building and gain access to Abbaney and Deja. Protective orders often rely on voluntary compliance unless they are tied to active monitoring systems or physical restrictions. In this case, the university was not alerted to the existence of protective order, and no steps were taken to block Smith's building access. Underestimating insider threats. Campus security protocols were designed to block outside intruders, but they failed to account for non-student insiders with prior access, such as former partners. Smith reportedly retained access to the building through a previously issued mailbox key. This oversight allowed him to walk into the residence hall undetected. Lack of centralized offender tracking. There was no system in place to flag individuals named in protective orders and restrict their access to student facilities. Protective orders issued by city or county authorities were not integrated with the university's security database or student housing systems. Communication gaps between agencies. The case highlighted poor coordination between local law enforcement, campus police, and university administration. The protective order was filed and valid, but it was not communicated or enforced at the campus level. There was no mechanism to notify Texas A&M Commerce security staff that a potentially violent individual had legal restrictions involving one of their residents. In the months following the murders, Texas A&M Commerce began reevaluating its campus security structure. ID entry protocols implemented. The university implemented mandatory ID swipes at all residence halls. This meant that students and authorized individuals could no longer rely on previously issued physical keys or general access cards. Every entry would be logged and monitored digitally. Mailbox access restrictions. A separate security policy was introduced to decouple mailbox keys from building access. Keys issued for mail purposes would no longer allow entry to the building, especially after a student or guest had their access revoked or moved out. External security review. The university commissioned an external security audit. Independent consultants were brought in to evaluate dorm access systems, emergency response plans, and visitor verification protocols. Legislative push. Following the publicity surrounding this case, local lawmakers proposed legislation that would link protective orders to automated access revocation systems on campuses. The goal was to create an integrated database that flags individuals under court order restrictions and immediately terminates any physical or digital access they might have to student housing, academic buildings, or communal facilities. These reforms were part of a growing call for colleges and universities to take more proactive measures in protecting students from threats linked to intimate partner violence and non-student individuals. Despite the legal actions and campus reforms, several unanswered questions remain. Why wasn't his access revoked after protective order was issued? There was no system in place to notify campus security of the order. This created a critical gap in enforcement. Could earlier arrests have led to longer detention? Smith had multiple arrests, yet he was released shortly before the murders. This raises questions about pretrial release decisions in domestic violence cases. Why wasn't there a real-time alert system for potential threats? There were no tools in place to alert dormitory staff or residents that a known threat had re-entered the premises. How many other campuses face similar hidden vulnerabilities? The issues revealed at Texas A&M Commerce likely exists in various forms on other campuses nationwide. Many rely on outdated or non-integrated access systems. To the audience, we ask, should colleges immediately revoke all access for individuals named in protective orders? Even non-students? Are campus residence halls truly safe, or do they just appear to be secure? What measures should be mandatory when a student reports domestic violence? How should schools handle non-student visitors in dormitories? Could AI-based surveillance, real-time flagging systems, or access monitoring have saved Deja and Abbaney's lives? This case was not just a failure of one individual. It was a breakdown of multiple systems designed to protect. If you found this story as gripping and heartbreaking as we did, don't forget to like this video and share it with others. And if you want to hear more true crime stories that uncover the mysteries behind these tragic events, make sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell. You won't want to miss our latest stories, updates, and discussions. Thank you for joining us on this journey to seek justice and explore the truth. Together, we can make a difference. Until next time, stay safe and stay aware.
Cause this is my birthday, bitch. And I am 28. I will smack a big bitch. What that bitch wanna do? I'll send you right to the Lord.
On June 25th, 2023, 28-year-old Jasity Strong was celebrating her birthday in Kansas City, Missouri. It was supposed to be a milestone marked by joy, laughter, and family. Instead, it turned fatal. What began as a night of celebration ended with bullets flying through the air at an after-hours venue on 57th Street and Prospect Avenue. Jasity, a mother of two, certified nursing assistant and aspiring RN, was shot and killed in a mass shooting that left her family shattered and her children without their mother. In a city plagued by gun violence, her death quickly became another name in the headlines until her mother, Jameka Jenkins, decided to fight for more. Surveillance footage, eyewitness reports, and unanswered 911 calls leave behind a trail of questions. Who fired the fatal shots? Why were there no arrests? Was this a targeted act or reckless chaos? And how did law enforcement respond to the aftermath?
Yes, this is a family that is still in shock. Her mother spoke with her at midnight on her birthday, and Jazz, as her family calls her, told her she was going to be coming to her house, but she never made it. Strong was one of three people killed when gunfire broke out early on Sunday. She had just turned 28 years old at midnight. She was out celebrating with her friends. She had so much to be happy about, a career as a makeup artist, and she had recently gotten her certification as a CNA, but she was most proud, her family says, of being the mother of two children.
This is not just a story of a victim. This is the story of a woman with ambition, a mother with dreams, and a system that failed to protect her. While her family demands justice and pushes for legislative change, those responsible remain unidentified. As we unravel Jasity's story, from her personal life and professional ambitions to the circumstances of her death and the ongoing silence surrounding the case, we ask, how many more victims will there be before meaningful change takes place? This episode isn't just about what happened. It's about what hasn't happened. Accountability, transparency, and justice. Stay with us as we break down everything, step by step, uncovering the facts the headlines left behind. If you enjoy real crime stories that uncover the truth, don't forget to subscribe. Your support helps us share real cases, spread awareness, and give a voice to those who can't speak for themselves. Before we begin, let us know in the comments, where are you watching from? And what are your thoughts as the story unfolds? Welcome to True Crime Tales, where we reveal the crimes that shock communities and the secrets hidden behind closed doors. These are real people, real events, real consequences. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Now, let's begin. Jasity Strong, also known as Jazz, was a 28-year-old woman born on June 25, 1995. She lived in Kansas City, Missouri, and worked as a certified nursing assistant. At the time of her death, she was actively pursuing her goal of becoming a registered nurse. Her commitment to the healthcare profession was influenced by her personal experiences, particularly those involving the care of older relatives, which motivated her to seek a formal nursing license. Jasity was a self-taught makeup artist who gained recognition for her craft. She competed in Kansas City's People's Choice competition and reached the semifinalist stage. On social media, she frequently posted videos and pictures of her work, accumulating a local following. She was described by many who knew her as a social and energetic woman who loved celebrating birthdays, especially her own. She had 2 children, Kirsten, a 6-year-old daughter, and Junior, her 1-year-old son. According to family accounts, Jasity was devoted to her children. She often shared milestones, family outings, and portraits of them dressed and styled with great attention to detail. Her mother, Jameka Jenkins, said Jasity's primary motivation was to provide her kids with a better future. In the wake of her death, friends and community members expressed that Jasity was more than another homicide statistic. However, like many victims of inner-city gun violence, her case received only brief attention from mainstream media outlets. How do we humanize victims in media coverage beyond their death statistics? On June 25, 2023, Jasity Strong turned 28 years old. That evening, she began celebrating her birthday with close friends. The festivities extended into the late night and early morning hours at an after-hours venue located near 57th Street and Prospect Avenue in Kansas City, Missouri. Earlier that night, around midnight, she FaceTimed her mother to share a celebratory toast. This call would be the last confirmed communication between Jasity and her family. According to her mother, she appeared joyful, vibrant, and ready to celebrate the occasion with her circle of friends. The venue where the celebration occurred was described as an underground party location. Reports suggest it lacked official permits and did not meet standard safety protocols. Security was minimal or non-existent. Witnesses later stated that the party was crowded, the environment was high energy, and there were no visible security checks at the entrance. The lack of regulation at this venue would later become a point of concern in public discussions following the incident. Multiple community members expressed concern over the venue's operation. It was reportedly not the first time that large, unregulated gatherings had occurred in that space. However, there was no official record indicating previous enforcement actions or city oversight on the property. Should underground venues be monitored more closely by law enforcement? At some point during or after the peak of the birthday celebration, gunshots were fired inside or near the venue. Multiple rounds rang out, causing panic and confusion. Witness accounts describe a scene of sudden chaos. People running in every direction, diving for cover, and attempting to exit the building. Emergency services were not immediately present. Some witnesses reported delays in medical response and law enforcement arrival. Others noted the absence of on-site security personnel who could have intervened or mitigated the danger. Several individuals were reportedly injured in the gunfire. Jasity Strong was one of the individuals struck by bullets. Her injuries proved fatal, and she was later pronounced dead. Initial reports from Kansas City police did not specify the total number of victims or the nature of other injuries sustained at the venue. The number of shooters involved in the incident remains unknown. Some witnesses claimed that more than one person may have discharged a firearm, while others said they could not clearly identify who was responsible. As of the most recent updates, no suspect had been arrested or charged in connection with the shooting. Police issued a public statement requesting information and tips from those who were present at the event. Despite surveillance footage and eyewitness testimony, no definitive leads have been shared with the public. The motive behind the shooting is unclear. Authorities have not publicly confirmed whether the attack was targeted or random. This lack of clarity has led to increasing frustration among the victim's family and the community. Jasity's mother, Jameka, has expressed that she receives limited updates on the case. Months after the shooting, there have been no named persons of interest and no arrests made. The case joins a growing list of unsolved homicides in Kansas City. According to city crime statistics, the rate of firearm-related homicides continues to rise, with many cases remaining unresolved due to lack of evidence, witness fear, or community mistrust in law enforcement. Why is it so difficult to prosecute shooters in crowded public spaces? when gunfire erupted at the after-hours venue on 57th Street and Prospect Avenue in the early hours of June 25, 2023. Multiple 911 calls were placed by witnesses reporting chaos, injuries, and fatalities. However, several individuals at the scene later reported a significant delay in the arrival of emergency responders. Eyewitnesses claimed that victims were left unattended for critical minutes, during which bystanders attempted to help the injured using makeshift methods. Torn clothing for tourniquets and private vehicles used for transport. According to city incident logs, the first formal police report was filed over 20 minutes after the first call came in. EMS units followed shortly after, but community members questioned whether response time would have been faster in another part of the city. Adding to public concern is the unclear operational status of the venue where the shooting occurred. Several attendees and neighborhood residents stated that the venue had operated multiple times before as an unauthorized party spot. There is no clear public record confirming whether the building was permitted for such use or had been previously flagged for code violations. This gap in transparency has fueled speculation about local enforcement patterns and oversight of high-risk areas. Following the incident, the Kansas City Police Department, KCPD, issued a brief statement acknowledging the shooting, identifying Jasity Strong as one of the deceased, and asking for public assistance in gathering information. No suspects were named. No arrests were made in the days, weeks, or months after shooting. Updates from KCPD remain minimal, citing an ongoing investigation. This incident adds to Kansas City's growing list of unsolved homicides. As of mid-2024, the city continues to experience one of the highest per capita murder rates in the United States. Data from local watchdog groups show that the clearance rate, cases solved with arrests or convictions, is disproportionately lower for Black female victims. No press conference was held to address community concerns. No surveillance footage was publicly released. No detailed timeline of the investigation was made available. Public frustration intensified as similar incidents occurred in the same area over the following months, with equally limited law enforcement response. Is law enforcement prioritizing the safety of Black women in high-crime areas, or are their cases deprioritized when no immediate suspect is identified? Jasity Strong's mother, Jameka Jenkins, recalls her last moment with her daughter vividly. At exactly midnight on June 25th, they FaceTimed each other, celebrating Jasity's 28th birthday. Jameka described her daughter as happy and glowing as she prepared to go out. Hours later, Jameka was awoken by a phone call no parent wants to receive. Jasity had been shot and killed. The emotional and psychological toll on Jameka has been severe. Already battling lupus, a chronic autoimmune disease, Jameka found her physical health rapidly deteriorating in the aftermath of her daughter's death. She also began showing signs of clinical depression and PTSD, requiring medical and therapeutic intervention. She stated in an interview that she experiences recurring nightmares and panic attacks triggered by loud noises or sirens. The family was immediately faced with the challenge of caring for Jasity's two children, 6-year-old Kirsten and 1-year-old Junior. As per Jasity's known wishes, guardianship was split. Kirsten remained with Jameka, while Junior was placed in the custody of his biological father. This arrangement was formalized within weeks, but not without emotional strain. In the days following Jasity's death, her family organized vigils and memorial events throughout Kansas City. They used these moments not just to mourn, but to amplify calls for justice and legislative change. One such initiative was the formation of a grassroots campaign for Jasity's Law, which would restrict firearms at unlicensed public gatherings. The family also launched a GoFundMe campaign to support the long-term needs of Kirsten and Junior. The fundraiser covered counseling services, education funds, and basic living expenses. Community donations poured in, but the emotional void remains unresolved. Despite their consistent outreach, the family received limited updates from investigators. This lack of communication only deepened their frustration, prompting them to speak directly to media outlets, hoping the exposure might force movement in the case. How do families navigate grief and caregiving responsibilities when the justice system offers no closure or support? Jasity's killing sparked a wave of shock, but not surprise, across Kansas City. In 2023, the city experienced an unprecedented surge in gun violence, with over 180 homicides recorded that year alone. The intersection of 57th Street and Prospect Avenue, where Jasity was killed, had already been the site of multiple shootings in the past 2 years. While the community mourned her loss, they also expressed deep frustration. Many residents stated that the danger in that area had been reported numerous times to city officials with no response. Some said they had filed complaints about the illegal party venue months earlier. Nothing changed. Local leaders, including city council members and state representatives, issued official statements offering condolences and decrying the violence. However, residents noted that no legislation followed those remarks. No emergency city council meetings were called. No task force was created to investigate unregulated venues. Within weeks, public attention faded. In response, several community activists organized marches and protests demanding both police accountability and legislative action. Some held signs reading, "Who protects black women?" and "Silence is violence." Still, media coverage remained localized, and national attention never reached the case. Grassroots groups have continued to raise awareness. They've called for increased patrols in high-violence zones, mandatory closure of illegal venues, and clearer protocols for police responsiveness. Yet, to date, there has been minimal movement on any of these fronts. Advocates question why political figures, who showed up for photo ops during the vigil, did not return with policy reform or tangible commitments. A few lawmakers cited ongoing reviews or lack of jurisdiction when pressed for answers. When politicians issue condolences but take no action, what does that signal to communities impacted by violence? In the aftermath of the June 25, 2023, shooting that claimed the life of 28-year-old Jasity Strong, during her birthday celebration, a new form of advocacy began to take root. Jasity's mother, Jameka Jenkins, refusing to let her daughter's death become just another unsolved homicide statistic in Kansas City, began pushing for a legislative response, what would come to be known as Jasity's Law. This law, still in a conceptual and grassroots stage, aims to prevent firearms at public and unlicensed gatherings, events like the one where Jasity was fatally shot. These environments, often held in makeshift venues without proper oversight or security, have become hotspots for violent outbreaks. Jasity's Law seeks to close that gap by holding both attendees and organizers accountable when firearms are brought into these spaces. Jameka Jenkins has argued that too many people have died because of the lack of regulation around such events, and her daughter's death has become the catalyst for change. Jameka has begun meeting with local officials, attending city council sessions, and presenting her case in the form of first-hand testimony. Her primary goal is bipartisan support, not just as a symbolic gesture, but as a legislative necessity in a politically divided environment. She has stated that this isn't about party lines or ideology. It's about public safety, particularly in urban communities where illegal firearms and reckless usage are an ongoing concern. The proposed bill's core components include prohibiting possession of firearms at non-licensed social venues and gatherings, imposing fines or penalties on event hosts who fail to enforce this rule, establishing a local database of public incident reports for recurring high-risk venues, increasing patrol and oversight by law enforcement during known unregulated events. At the grassroots level, community petitions have been initiated by friends, local residents, and advocacy groups. Signatures are being collected both online and at in-person community events. A social media campaign using the hashtag Jasity's Law has aimed to gain traction and draw broader attention to the issue. Volunteers and local organizers continue to distribute flyers in campus neighborhoods, urging the public to support the initiative and call their representatives. Still, Jameka and her supporters have acknowledged the uphill battle they face. Lawmakers are slow to act. Gun rights lobbyists in Missouri remain strong and influential, often pushing back on anything perceived to restrict access, even in high-risk zones. Additionally, the issue is complicated by the fact that the party responsible for Jasity's death has not yet been caught. Critics argue that without a solved case or clearer motive, legislation like this might lose momentum. Nonetheless, Jameka has maintained that whether or not an arrest is made, her daughter's death revealed a loophole in public safety that must be addressed through policy. Can a local tragedy like this lead to meaningful legislative change? When Jasity Strong was killed, the story initially captured the attention of Kansas City media outlets. Local news ran features on the tragic birthday shooting, including short interviews with family members and footage of memorial gatherings. However, like many other similar cases, media attention faded within weeks. National outlets never picked up the story, and social media buzz was brief. The lack of suspects or major updates meant that news cycles moved on quickly to the next headline. One of the biggest frustrations voiced by Jameka and Jasity's family has been the short-lived nature of the coverage. Despite ongoing trauma, unanswered questions, and their efforts to push forward a legislative solution, the broader public remains unaware or indifferent. Even as they attend rallies or meetings and continue to call out systemic failures, they do so without the backing of national media pressure that might help apply leverage to local law enforcement or lawmakers. Family members and advocates have attempted to keep the case in public view through consistent social media posting, community events, and podcast interviews. But without a celebrity connection, high-profile investigation, or viral moment, the case has struggled to remain in public discourse. This pattern is not new. Numerous cases involving Black women, particularly in inner-city environments, receive brief attention and are then forgotten. Public interest seems to hinge on how sensational or unusual a case appears. In contrast, Jasity's case, a mother killed in a mass shooting at a birthday celebration, while tragic, was quickly categorized as another episode in a long series of urban violence stories. Jameka Jenkins has publicly criticized this tendency, pointing out the disparity in attention between victims from marginalized communities and those from more affluent backgrounds. She argues that if Jasity had lived in a different zip code, the story might have gained traction. She continues to send emails, reach out to journalists, and participate in media interviews to maintain visibility. To date, the only continuing spotlight comes from Kansas City community advocates, Black-run local media, and grassroots organizations fighting gun violence. Their support remains the only barrier between Jasity's story and complete public forgetfulness. Why do some cases gain national traction, while others are forgotten? As of June 2024, the murder case of Jasity Strong remains unsolved. Despite multiple public appeals, social media outreach, and local media coverage, no arrests have been made. No suspect has been formally named. No person of interest has been publicly identified by law enforcement. 1 year after the 28-year-old mother was gunned down during her birthday celebration, her family still has no answers. The incident occurred in the early hours of June 25, 2023, at an after-hours venue located at 57th Street and Prospect Avenue in Kansas City, Missouri. Reports confirm a mass shooting broke out during the birthday party, where Jasity was present with friends and acquaintances. While several individuals sustained injuries, Jasity Strong was among the few who died on scene. The chaos that unfolded made it difficult for investigators to identify a clear shooter or motive, despite repeated outreach from Jasity's family, including her mother, Jameka Jenkins. Police have provided minimal information about the investigation's progress. According to Jameka, most of the information she receives comes from secondhand sources or media updates, not from official channels. No timeline for justice has been communicated. No press conference has been held regarding new leads or evidence. The investigation appears to have stalled. The Kansas City Police Department has acknowledged ongoing challenges with solving violent crimes in areas like Prospect Avenue, citing a lack of cooperation from witnesses and insufficient surveillance in unlicensed venues. However, community members argue that these justifications are not enough. They point out that a lack of arrests after 1 year highlights deeper issues of neglect, resourcing failures, and a disregard for justice in Black communities. The absence of a clear motive also remains a point of concern. Investigators have not released any statements suggesting whether the shooting was targeted, random, or connected to a personal dispute. This silence has fueled public speculation, confusion, and mistrust. Community leaders and advocates have labeled the silence unacceptable. They have called for increased transparency, accountability, and urgency. Several community-led marches and vigils have demanded updates and insisted that unsolved homicides like Jasity's should not fade from public view. In the absence of law enforcement progress, Community members are beginning to explore the possibility of involving independent investigators. Private detectives, civil rights attorneys, and nonprofit crime-solving initiatives are being considered to apply additional pressure and possibly uncover leads that official channels have missed or overlooked. Should unsolved homicides be revisited by independent investigators? Jasity Strong's life was defined by ambition, family, and community. She was a certified nursing assistant working toward her goal of becoming a registered nurse. She was also a self-taught makeup artist recognized in her community. Above all, she was a mother of 2 young children, Kirsten, age 6, and Junior, age 1, whom she adored and supported. Her violent death did more than end a promising life. It left a permanent void in her family. Her children will grow up without their mother. Her mother, Jameka, now lives with chronic illness, depression, and the weight of seeking justice in a system that has so far failed them. Her extended family and community continue to ask how someone could be shot and killed at a crowded party with no one held responsible. In the wake of her death, her family has worked to turn tragedy into advocacy. Jameka Jenkins is pushing for Jasity's law, which will prohibit firearms at unlicensed public gatherings. She hopes it will prevent similar incidents from occurring in Kansas City and beyond. The proposed law has garnered some community support, but so far, no legislative action has been taken. The lack of accountability in Jasity's case points to broader systemic failures. Failures in public safety, law enforcement responsiveness, and justice system prioritization. Community leaders argue that victims from marginalized communities, particularly Black women, often receive slower investigations and less media attention than other demographics. The story of Jasity Strong remains unfinished. Until suspects are arrested, a motive is confirmed, and a trial is held, this case continues to be marked by silence and stagnation. No one has been held accountable. No one has answered for the life that was taken. And no institutional safeguards have been introduced to ensure such violence doesn't happen again. The public is left to question whether enough is being done to protect lives like Jasity's. Her death did not occur in isolation. It occurred within the context of rising gun violence, weak enforcement of venue regulations, and inconsistent attention to crimes affecting young Black women. As of today, Jasity's family remains locked in a cycle of unanswered questions and unresolved grief. They continue to fight, not just for their daughter, but for a future where others won't suffer the same fate. They ask for justice, they ask for visibility, and they ask for anyone, to be held accountable. This case raises critical questions. Who protects women like Jasity in high-risk communities? What would real justice look like in this case? And how long must families wait before the system takes action? These are not questions with easy answers, but they are questions that must be asked. And until they are answered, the fight for justice in the case of Jasity Strong continues. If you found this story as gripping and heartbreaking as we did, don't forget to like this video and share it with others. And if you want to hear more true crime stories that uncover the mysteries behind these tragic events, make sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell. You won't want to miss our latest stories, updates, and discussions. Thank you for joining us on this journey to seek justice and explore the truth. Together, we can make a difference. Until next time, stay safe and stay aware.